So I was searching for an upcoming trip I had to Cozumel, Mexico, when I came across a claim that I found interesting, I guess you could say. According to this claim, Abraham Lincoln apparently tried to buy the island of Cozumel from the Mexican government so he could set up a colony of freed slaves there. And you know, Abraham Lincoln is like kind of a big deal, kind of a big guy, so you'd think I'd notice him there. So let's see, did Abraham Lincoln actually try and buy the island of Cozumel, Mexico? So the story goes that in 1861, Abraham Lincoln had his Secretary of State, William Henry Seward, get in contact with the Mexican ambassador to the United States to see about if a deal could be made. Eventually, this deal got back to the then liberal president of Mexico, Benito Juarez, and he essentially said, "No, get the hell out of here. Yeah, we already gave you so much land. No. Cozumel is ours. Look at these lovely beaches. Look at these lovely reefs. For more on that, check out this video. Look, no, we're not sending any of this to you." And while that response may end up being actually pretty based, is it actually accurate? What even are the pillars that this story tries to stand on in the first place? Well, thankfully Wikipedia has the source on this one, and it looks like it's from a book about 2011. I don't know, I'm not really gonna check that. Thankfully, the author posted the entire section in question on his website, so we don't actually have to pay for any of this. So as we begin to examine their argument, we can see that it's made up of 4 parts. First is going to be Lincoln's membership in the American Colonization Society. Second, it's going to rely on a few of Lincoln's speeches. His Peoria speech, his 4th debate with Stephen A. Douglas in the 1960 presidential debates, and his address to a delegation of black men visiting the White House. Now, the first stop in our journey is going to take us to the American Colonization Society. Back in 1816, William Clay, eventual 3-time presidential race loser and Whig Party founder, would go on to set up the ACS. But what was the goal of the ACS with their patriotic sounding name and all? Well, of course, they wanted to deport all the black people in America and send them to Africa. Once they reached Africa, they were to begin setting up different colonies under the American flag. Now, these individual colonies, of course, were going to be very American in culture. A lot of the people there, their ancestors had been in the US for hundreds of years already, and as a result of the settlers' long time in America, their culture was noticeably different than any of the native ones. This, of course, led to plenty of clashes and all-around struggles. One such colony that was founded was, of course, the country of Liberia, where thankfully they still use our measurement system, even though they're phasing it out for metric. Rest in peace to one of the real ones. Overall, the whole colonization idea kind of died down after a little while, but eventually it would begin to pick up steam again in the 1850s. Now, Lincoln was indeed a member of the ACS. He even was invited twice by them to speak at some meetings, and he did so. But that's not really the main point of the argument here today. So let's go ahead and move on to see just what those speeches Lincoln had. Our first speech on the plate today is going to come from Lincoln addressing a crowd at Peoria, Illinois. In this speech, we can find him saying, "My first impulse would be to free all the slaves and send them to Liberia, to their own native land. But a moment's reflection would convince me that whatever of high hopes, as I think there may be in this, in the long run its sudden execution is impossible." Well now, there's a lot to unpack there, but let's hear what the other ones are. Maybe he changes his tone. You know, things sound a little better in the future. Now, his next speech is largely going to be a rebuttal of Stephen A. Douglas's claims that Lincoln favored social equality for all races. And before we jump to conclusions, let's see just what he had to say. "I will say then that I am not, nor have I ever been, in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equalities of the white and black races. that I am not, nor have I ever been, in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor of qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people. And I will say in addition to this that there is a physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races living together on terms of social and political equality. And inasmuch as they cannot so live, while they do remain there, must be the position of superior and inferior. And as much as I, as any other man, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race. Okay, so doesn't really seem like things are turning better. This time he's actually addressing a delegation of actual black men at the White House, so I'm sure it's this time his words will come through properly. You blacks and we whites are of different races. This physical difference is a great disadvantage to both of us. Your race is suffering, in my opinion, one of the most grievous injustices inflicted on any people. But even when you are freed from slavery, you are far from equal with the white race. That is why it is better for both races to be kept separate. Fuck Lincoln, really? Okay, so this one was meant by understandable outrage by prominent abolitionist Frederick Douglass. He pretty much said,
I'm sorry, I said too many bad words here. Just know he was really, really mad at them.
But okay, so those all may seem like some pretty unsavory lines to our ears today, but we do have the benefit of being able to analyze 150 years worth of knowledge. See, really, what's going on under the surface? Is there more to this story than our source claims? So let's take into account that we are in the mid-1800s in a deeply divided America, where the question of what happens when slavery ends was hot on everyone's mind. If you are a politician, you're getting asked at a debate. Doesn't matter your position. Postmaster General, you're gonna get asked this question. You just deliver mail. So this question was even more serious in a country that was literally threatening civil war, depending on how slavery even went. So say you're Abraham Lincoln, someone who deeply wants to preserve the Union, that is your ultimate goal. What are you going to do in that crowd? Are you going to speak what your heart may say and say, yeah, we should just end slavery and just have people just, equal maybe? Or are you going to try and soften the blow and bridge the gap a little there between you and racist people and say, maybe we should just send them all away, but still in slavery? That may end up seeming like a more favorable position to a lot of the asshole. Well, to answer this, we're first going to stop by Mexican ambassador to the United States, Mateus Romero, under the time of Lincoln's presidency. Now, Mateus, he went early on, right as Lincoln was elected, and he showed up. He was the only foreign ambassador to do so and formed a close connection with the guy. So he does actually have quite a bit of credibility in this department here. So let's see what he has to say. In a journal from June of 1861, he recounts a meeting he had with the then Postmaster General Montgomery Blair, in which Blair suddenly asked him, hey, the island of Cozumel, doesn't that seem like a great place that we could send all of our slaves? It's a hot tropical climate. We need something for them to do when they're freed, and I really am a big proponent of colonization. Did you know my dad was a member of Andrew Jackson's kitchen cabinet? And they both favored this as well, generally. And so does my brother over in the Senate. So, what do you say about it? But Mateo had a response that I don't quite think Blair was hoping for. He promptly let him know that Mexico did not have a population issue in these areas. That wasn't what they were needing to fix at the time. And to add to that, if you did free all the slaves, do you really think that they're going to just pick everything up and move to Cozumel, Mexico? They've been in the United States for quite a while now. You do realize this. Still, Blair somehow did impress Mateo with his overall knowledge of Mexican affairs and his support of their cause, enough so that a year later, they would end up meeting again to talk about colonization. Now this time Blair approached Romero again, stating that he had actually been approached by a New York businessman, Edward Dunbar, and a former Cuban general and filibuster, Domingo de Goria. The two men had apparently approached Blair checking to see if the US government would actually be interested in buying the island of Cozumel. But Blair wasn't 100% sure about this based off his previous conversation he had with Romero, so he wanted to go and check. Did Domingo even have the authority to propose this sale? And I just love Romero's response here. He quickly lets Blair know that, no, this man has no authority in this deal at all. He cannot propose the sale. He is not Mexican. He does not care about the Mexican people. He has explicitly told me this himself. He has no one's interest at heart except for his own. So yeah, he cannot sell it. But Blair wasn't going to be deterred by this. He continued to press on. Cozumel is a deserted island which in no way serves the Mexicans, and the white race could not possibly acclimatize itself on Cozumel or the Yucatan, which is inhabited by the Indians. We need to rid ourselves of blacks, and we cannot encounter another place more appropriate to send them than that island. Okay, so I was just on the island of Cozumel, and I think that he has it a bit wrong. That island, it isn't hospitable for everyone. The mosquitoes and the sun do not care what you are. You will end up a sunburnt tourist there. Also, there had been a town that was settled from some refugees of a recent war just like 13 years earlier over there, so I guess maybe news hadn't gotten to them, or I'm not really sure. But anyways, Romero, he still wasn't having it, and he promptly let him know, dude, stop. We are not giving you up any land. You realize this is Mexico that you're asking more land from. This just isn't gonna work. And so as Romero had a bit of time to simmer on the overall situation here of Blair's request, seeing a bill passed in Congress that allowed Lincoln to set up some colonization efforts, and hearing Lincoln advocate for it himself in an address, he ended up kind of making that conclusion that the US had been talking about buying the island of Cozumel and the surrounding peninsula for quite a while now. Okay, but just how accurate is this assumption here? You know, he was a credible source, he was in the time, he did personally know Lincoln, but let's see what actual steps were taken in the colonization schemes. So if we take a step back to the year 1858, to Chiriquí, Panama, back then Colombia, we would find a one Ambrose W. Thompson, former Philadelphia shipbuilder and now owner of the Chiriquí Improvement Company. He offered the U.S. government to use his land in his coal reserves as naval coaling stations for the United States and as a potential way to build a railroad across the isthmus, crossing over to the Pacific. Now, unfortunately for Ambrose, his coal was kind of horrible quality and it would catch on fire on the ships transporting it back. And plus his land turns out was just horrible for building a railroad, so the whole deal ended up just going nowhere and eventually died in Congress in 1861. Then there was the time that the U.S. consul in Havana, Cuba decided to travel on down to Mexico City and personally insert himself into ongoing negotiations there, demanding that Mexico give up some land that the U.S. can start some colonization on. Now, of course, the U.S. Secretary of State privately let him know, hey, stop, don't put yourself in my affairs here. I'm working hard on this. We're all working hard. No one wants you here. No one likes you here. About 80% sure that's the real quote. So on December 1st, 1862, Lincoln would announce to Congress that all colonization attempts without treaties from their respective governments were going to be halted. They didn't really want to deal with these shady guys anymore anyways. But in this address to Congress, Lincoln also asked them to pass 3 separate constitutional amendments. One for gradual emancipation, one supporting colonization, and then one for compensation for former slave owners. So not really the best message, but so it actually wasn't just the local governments that Lincoln was looking to negotiate with. Now, across the Atlantic, we have quite a few formidable European powers who own quite a bit of land that, well, we may want to set up shop in. And so negotiations were started with all the powers of the old world, who mostly promptly responded, no, just the same as the Latin American countries had. This, of course, was except for two notable exceptions. One, the British Empire, and two, Holland. Now, things actually did get so far to set up some colonies in British Honduras that some plans were actually drawn up, but due to transatlantic communication being what it was back in the day, everything kind of slowed to a halt and ended up never happening. And yeah, just by the fall of that very year, all the colonization efforts pretty much came to a halt and nothing really happened in it. Or is it? We would later see Congress take away those funds that they had given for the colonization efforts, and Lincoln referring to that act as an unfriendly amendment. And then also we would have Major General Benjamin Butler's accounts of a meeting with Lincoln on April 11th, 1865, where Lincoln asked him to search for a few new sites in South America to set up colonization efforts. Just 4 days later, on April 15th, at Ford's Theater, Lincoln would be assassinated, forever ending his evolving stance on colonization. So yeah, that's pretty much the whole story. Did Lincoln actually want to send all former slaves to Africa? No, of course not. That's not the goal at all. Most of these efforts were taking place in Latin America. And besides, did Lincoln try and buy the island of Cozumel? No, that was an off conversation once or twice kind of thing. Most of the efforts were nowhere near there, really. But what of Lincoln's overall position on colonization? Did he truly believe in this, or was it a shrewd, calculated political move meant to unite a divided country in troubled times? Well, sadly, we're never really going to know, as Lincoln never directly recorded his thoughts later in life on it. And so all we're left with is pretty much this and a little bit of extra detail I didn't leave out, but you guys can check my notes in the comments. Bye.